when I think about what I did, it's kind of crazy. But I do think that, especially young people, college kids, this is probably the only time you can take really huge risks.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Yumiko-san, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. And so this is Humans podcast series, and we dive into change makers, such as yourself, your human stories and your childhood stories. What kind of experiences and wisdoms that made you today? So, I will start with your introduction, and then we can get into all the questions. So, Yumiko Murakami serves as general partner at Empower Partners, Japan's first ESG-focused venture capital fund. After graduating from university in Japan, she moved to the United States to pursue graduate studies at Stanford University. Her first job out of school was with the United Nations, where she worked in Barbados, Cambodia, and New York. After earning an MBA from Harvard University, she worked in the investment banking industry for nearly 20 years, primarily with Goldman Sachs in New York, London, and Tokyo. Before launching Empower Partners in 2021, she spent 7 years at the OECD as the head of its Japan office. In this role, she was involved in economic policy development for various government entities. She currently serves as a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Panel, as well as several ministries. Very impressive.
Thank you.
And I know that you come from, you were born and raised in Shimane Prefecture, which is a really rural side of Japan. And I know because my father was actually from the neighboring prefecture in Yamaguchi. Yeah. And I used to visit, it's bordering Shimane. So I used to visit Tsuwano and Shimane Prefecture. And it's really beautiful, but very countryside. And can you, paint a picture for us? What was it like growing up in Shimane?
Well, I have only good memories. First of all, it's a beautiful, beautiful place. There is this very beautiful big lake called Shinjuku. I'm from Matsue, which is the capital town of Shimane. It has a beautiful lake, and there's a little section of Matsue that has old samurai houses. Big castle in Matsuejo, which is the original castle in the 16th century. And then there are several samurai houses in the same sort of area that the castle is. And then there's this huge, beautiful lake. So it's just very, very pretty. I mean, it's the beautiful combination of, the history and the nature. And then, so, I don't go back as often as I used to. My parents passed away a long time ago. But we used to have, my parents' house is still there. So once in a while I go back, and every time I go back, wow, it's incredible how beautiful it is. It's how rich it is in terms of the history, culture. There's a very strong tea ceremony culture in Matsue, and because of the samurai, and subsequently there's a lot of traditional Japanese culture he made it as flower arrangement or the tea ceremony to really a big part of the life of people living in Matsue. And like I said, beautiful lake from a bunch of beautiful mountains. The ocean is right there, Nihonkai. A lot of rice field. It's incredibly beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any childhood memories that can represent who you are today? Any personal stories?
I don't know if it would represent today, but as you said, it's a very, very this old castle and samurai houses and beautiful lake and rice field. But I think what was interesting, and back then when I was growing up in Matsue, I didn't really think this was going to be the biggest sort of trend that would shape the society of Japan. But looking back, what I was sort of witnessing, not really understanding what was happening in terms of demographic change. Um, it's interesting now to think that Japan, Matsue or Shimane was ahead of the curve. So growing up, we were already, this was back in, 80s and 90s, um, when the Japanese political leaders or, business leaders they were not even worried about this shrinking population. This was a really big deal. The shrinking population, Asian society was a really big deal. We are starting to see the real impact of this demographic trend in Shimai. So Kasochi. So basically, the population was shrinking in a very visible way, and that was impacting every corner of society. And again, that's where I grew up. That's how my mother started her business as well. Right. So again, I was a high school kid and didn't really think this was going to be like this was going to shape the economy of the country. It was already back in my world in the Shimane sort of context. Um, but it was kind of looking back, was interesting that I was exposed to it because I lived there, and young students or young people who would, leave Shimane, they would go to Tokyo, Osaka, big cities, and they don't come back, and the society, the population was aging with very few young people. So again, in many ways, Shimane or Matsue was, 30 years ahead of the country. At the time, I didn't realize this, but 30 years later, I look back and said, "Oh my God, I was seeing the future of Japan when I was in Shimane."
See, I think you have a brother, right?
I have three brothers. Three brothers and one sister.
Oh wow,
A big family. Five kids, yeah.
Oh wow. So I guess it's you're contributing to the shrinking population. You are trying to.
We were making a big impact, positive impact. Well, my parents,
yeah.
I guess my parents did by having five kids. Yeah.
And what was it like living in a big family with five kids?
Again, it was I guess when you are born in and sort of you're raised in that environment, you just don't think it was special anything like that. I mean, it was just like this took it granted. I mean, there were all those kids running around. There were, like three brothers, one sister. I was the oldest. So I take it for granted that, this was this was the family that, I really didn't question. I was not really thinking, oh, we're so different. We're special or we're unusual, anything like that. I had so much fun growing up with my brothers and sister. And, quite frankly, I now realize it was very rare. I mean, now look at my, friends or, other families, they normally have one kid. If they have two kids, that's like, wow, right? You have two kids, five kids. So I feel very fortunate. Again, as a child, I didn't think much of it because I just didn't question anything. But now I realize I was extremely fortunate that I had that environment where, um, I was able to grow up in that environment, and I'm still very close with my siblings. I mean, of course, parents normally, they go for their way, and siblings are the ones that you end up spending more time in your lifetime. Which is exactly what I do. Right, so I see a lot of, I see my brothers and sister very often, and they're my in many ways supporters, and I think it's the great blessing that I have.
And you have a very international career. Is it the same for your brothers and sister? They all went out?
Not all of them, but so my middle brother, he joined after college. He joined Socious. He joined Brain Bomb. So he was posted in several different countries. I think he was in Russia for several years. He was in Korea. So he spent quite a bit of time living outside Japan. And the other two brothers have been always in Japan. And then my sister, who still lives in New York, she has been out of the country for almost all of her adult life. She married a New Philharmonic musician. So he's obviously based in New York. He's Japanese, but they met in New York and they got married. And because he is based in New York for his work, she had to meet you for 20 days to a year, something like that. So she comes back to Japan this summer. She was here this summer as well. So I think that's quite good.
And I think it's quite unusual that family from Shimane produces lots of global talents. What do you think made a difference for your family?
Honestly, there was nothing that I can say, oh, this is because I grew up in Shimane, because I grew up in that environment. I wanted to leave. I didn't want to leave Japan. I didn't, ultimately came back. So I cannot say there was one thing that happened to me as I was growing up in Shimane that made me, the choices that made me sort of, contributed to my choices in terms of living, only to different countries. But I would say that maybe it has very little to do with Shimane or, Matsu or anything like that, but maybe the fact that my mother was very entrepreneurial. She started her own business, and both my parents were extremely I guess the way that were trusting. They were extremely supportive of in terms of how they supported. I mean, all parents support their kids, but the way they kind of handle me or my sibling was very much hands off. And, they were very, very supportive in terms of what we wanted to do. And there was very little ego of parents. Um, so I think that kind of helped me to make my own decisions and sort of take the ownership in terms of, um, my career choices, my life choices. And I think it was great that my parents were very supportive of me making, seemingly very risky decisions, but they had a lot of trust in me. And I think, they did the same with my siblings as well.
Amazing. And your mother was a very successful entrepreneur in like one of the most famous people in Shimane. And
I don't know, but famous.
yeah, but it's an incredible story that she was a housewife for a number of years, and after at the age of 47 or so, I think she started her drugstore and became super successful. Were there any struggles or challenges that she faced that you witnessed, and what did you learn from watching her struggles?
It was all about struggle, especially in the beginning. I was already in the U.S. when she was starting this. To me, it was great, the idea of it. I didn't understand what she was trying to do, and quite frankly, I was not thinking she would be able to succeed to be honest with you. But she wanted to do it, and she did it, and to my surprise, she just became extremely successful. So, in the beginning, in particular, was not easy. As you said, she didn't have any business background, so to speak. She was always a 560 rate, right? That kept up pretty good. So that was what she did for a number of years until she started this business at the age of 47 or 38 or something like that. And in the beginning, again, it was very difficult because even number one, she had no business background. Number two, she, was a woman and quite frankly, very conservative, um, Shimane, you know, you can only imagine, right? They're only men who would be running businesses. So, I think it was just very difficult because of that as well. there are a number of challenges that she had to deal with in the beginning. One of them was access to capital. Again, she had, she didn't have the kind of background that banks would want to see, right? What many loans, and she didn't. So she really had to basically use my dad, and he was a man, and he had more sort of credibility, I guess, so to speak. So, she really had to leverage his sort of status, and that's what she did. But she was able to, in the end, she was able to secure capital. She was able to expand businesses. And in the end, she was able to sell her company to a very large, one of the largest companies in the drugstore history, Teha. But like I said, in the beginning, as she was growing business, her operations, she was opening stores every year. There were, I guess, number of new stores that she was opening, which required a lot of capital, and then access to capital was definitely an issue. But also just dealing with, customers, suppliers, again, being a woman, their initial reaction is, what are you doing here? You're a housewife. That kind of, reaction was very typical, especially in a very conservative Shimande environment. And I think she was very patient. She was able to, again, she wasn't trying to prove herself or anything like that at that point. It wasn't like, she's 22, trying to be fresh out of college, trying to prove herself to the world. She wasn't like that. And so she was very patient. She took her time. And she wasn't like, she wasn't in a hurry. So I think she took her time to make sure people around her understood what she was trying to do. And another thing that I think worked for her really well at the time, as I said earlier, she was in a leading Shimane prefecture in terms of demographic trend, right? So if you think about the way these retail stores and retail businesses work, especially in this healthcare or drugstore business, the national brands, Color of the World, and those are the companies who would basically dictate what these retail stores will sell. The shelf space is basically is driven by these national brands. And these national brands, large companies, who make, soap, detergents, and, baby diapers, and, stuff that you see at drugstores. They may not understand exactly what's happening in the Shimane prefectural market when they are based in Tokyo, because the demographic trend that was already changing the landscape of Shimane prefecture, it wasn't visible. It was not obvious in almost all Japan, all the other prefectures, where they're not witnessing how this was happening very fast. So these national brands did not really capture the potential demand coming from this demographic change. But my mother, she's from Shimane. She was there the whole time, her life, and she was taking care of the aging parents of my father. So the in-laws, who was like, I don't know, they were in the 80s, and they needed a lot of help. So, good for you, the wives, not the husbands, but the wives of these families, they are the ones who take care of aging parents. But not only, their parents, but also their, partners, their spouses' parents, right? This was typical. So that's exactly what my mother was doing. Oh, by the way, it was the case for all of her friends, right? All of her friends in her neighborhood, and this was just expected. So she knew exactly what would be very useful for people who would take care of, of aging parents. And that would include things like adult diapers. I mean, back then, the national brand who were running their businesses out of Tokyo, they did not see, demand for adult diapers. Diapers are for babies. That's what you would think if you're not really seeing this aging society, trend. So the national brands who would typically make baby diapers, they would say, okay, retail stores be, shelf space, you just dedicate 80% of the shelf space for, for diapers. They have 100% maybe. They should be baby diapers, right? That was my mother would say, no, 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 no. We don't have a lot of babies in Shimane. We have a lot of older people who need adult diapers, right? So my mother would just basically dictate the shelf space and make sure that there is a offering, there are products that are, in need in the aging society, environment, which is very unique in Chile. So if you are, if you're a business owner, basically my mother, a drugstore owner, typically you would sell what the national brands would help you to sell, right? But my mother saw a different sort of approach where, because she was the one who was she was providing care. She needed adult diapers. Her friends, her housewives friends, they all needed adult diapers. They didn't need baby diapers, right? So there are many other products that are like that. And she basically said, okay, we're going to make this, I'm going to make this special section of, products, specialized products for, aged people, whether they don't have diapers or other products, So that's how she kind of differentiated her drugstores. And it was a big hit. So every year she would open so many stores, and it was incredible how fast her business grew. But it was actually the advantage that she had was the fact that she was the consumer. She was the user. She was the consumer of these products, and she knew exactly, what the market, at least in the context of China, what the market needed and what the national brands were not providing. So it was a very interesting journey for me to, like I said, I was very worried because, my father who took, mortgage from the bank and we built a house, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this mother is going to fail, and our house or my parents' house would be taken away by the bank, and the disaster. I have to support them, because they're going to lose everything. And I was with Goldman Sachs, and I would just work with a number of companies, IPOs and things like that. And I knew how hard it was for companies to raise money because I was with Goldman Sachs. And I really thought it was very difficult for my mother. So I have to give her a lot of credit because I was very worried. But she did it. And, to her credit, it became one of the largest drugstore chains in the western part of Japan. So she expanded. So she started in Mafe, she started in Shimane, but she started to expanding into neighboring, Sumake, all the other prefectures in the western part of Japan, and it became eventually literally one of the largest drugstores in the western part of Japan, and that's when she sold a company to Suma.
What an incredible story.
Yeah, I have to say, Mom, I was wrong. You're right. Oh, you're bad to her.
And what was your father's initial reaction when your mother started her business?
I think he was very supportive in the very beginning, but at the same time, he didn't know what to expect. To be honest with you, I guess he was a little, he wasn't sure exactly what was going to happen to my mother's business. But to his credit, again, he was very supportive. I think the fact that he was able to kind of help her in terms of access to capital. He was very proactive in terms of helping her build relationships with local partners and things like that. So yeah, I think he was very, very supportive from the very beginning.
Amazing. What is the most important value that you learned from your parents and by observing them, not expertise?
Yeah, so like I said, I was not convinced this was gonna be successful, and again, I was wrong. And I would say one of the biggest lessons I learned, from my own mistake, because I didn't think it was going to be successful, was the fact that being different gives you this incredible advantage. And this is especially true in a startup context. So she was very different from everyone else. There was no one like her. There was absolute, not only the drugstore business, but in general, the business community in Machi Oshimane or is in Japan. There is no one like her, you know, a husband who was busy raising her kids, you know, starting a business like that. And, you know, I was worried about the fact that she had no business background and, but she actually just used that to her advantage. You know, um, she had this perspective that was very unique and that helped her shape the very differentiated strategy for her business. As I said earlier, she was the one who was looking after her aging parents with, and all of her friends were doing the same. We need old diapers. We don't need baby diapers. And if you are male, if you are a guy who have never taken care of older people, I mean, in Japan, that's typical, right? I mean, if you're a man, if you are like a guy, and your parents are aging, your parents are 80 something or 90 something and they need a lot of help, typically it's the wife. It's your wife who would, you know, look after them, not the guy, not the husband. Although I'm sure things are changing in that respect as well in Japan, but traditionally that's how things work. And that's what my mom did. But that really was a huge advantage in her case because she was running drugstore. So that was a lesson. So being different, you know, sometimes it's a great advantage, and you have to just take that as advantage.
And speaking of being different, I think you have unique experiences like going backpacking in China when it was quite difficult to travel to China and alone as a woman. But you also said that you were afraid you know, when your mother started a business. How can you tell us about like your backpacking experience? Like I think sometimes you know you have adventurous aspect, but also you learn how to manage here. Can you tell us about your?
So I always tell, you know, I always tell young people that, especially college kids, college students, when they ask about buying decisions, so what they should do, and I said, maybe I don't have a great buying decision, so you know, career choices or anything like that. But one thing I did where I was, I think like 19, 20, something like that, that really helped me in terms of how I would look at my life choices. Let that be. I literally had no money. Like I hadn't budgeted, I don't know, $2 a day or something like that. But it was amazing, sort of, you know, like being an eye-opening experience. And, you know, that's, you know, what I would love um, to tell people if people can do that, that's the really experience that can really help you understand, you know, who you are and who you want to become. So, you know, Matsui is it's very much sort of closed, very traditional, very conservative. Part of Japan. Japan itself is a very conservative society, but in particular, Matsui Shimane, very conservative. And there were no foreigners and, you know, very homogeneous, right? So you know, I come from that environment and, you know, and then I go see the world, you know, I was wow, right? This is incredible in terms of, you know, how different I am versus them, how different they are versus me. So just to be exposed to very different value systems and just not only language and you know, culture, you know, differences, but just in terms of the you know, life value, um, differences that you get to see when you leave your comfort zone and go to other places. And you know, I didn't really have money, so I really had to live on a $2 budget a day. So it was out of necessity, but I think it really helped me to really uh, meet people because you stay in a really cheap news hostel, and you end up meeting people from you know all around the world who are also talking like me, backpacking and you know $2 daily budget, and you know that probably doesn't meeting people like that may not be may not be possible when you're staying at five-star hotel. Then you're eating at Michelin three star restaurants, and it's not like you meet a lot of people down there, right? And quite frankly, I admit that I don't do that anymore. I don't stay at these hostels, and I don't I have more than $2 a day budget. So if I were to, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do what I did when I was when I was in college. So I think this is the type of thing that you should do when you are young and healthy. First of all, because you capture a lot of sun, capture a lot of you have to be healthy to be able to do that. But you're also very hungry, you have a lot of thirsty, hungry meaning physical hungry, but also just you are curious about things that are not part of your daily life. And again, I have seen so many countries now. I have seen so many different cultures. I've lived in so many different countries at this point in my life. So I probably would not have the same reaction if I were to do something that this today. But when I was 18 or 19, coming from Matsuri, where there was absolutely no culture or no sort of, it was very homogeneous society, right? So I think something like that when you're young, and you are completely, you're sort of like, blank sheet, right? There's nothing on your plate. It's incredible how life changing and incredibly rich experience that can be. So I would definitely recommend this to especially young people, and I will always say it's better to have very small budget because it will force you to meet people. It will force you to live like locals. I mean, you can't eat at expensive restaurant. If you have a budget, you eat like locals, right? So it's something that I think young people should do.
Can you tell us about the time when you have near-death experience with your food poisoning?
Or in China, or in Cambodia. I don't know. In China. Or China was terrible. I think I had a really bad case. I don't remember where it was. I literally had very high fever, and I didn't know go speak Chinese. Although how you can write Chinese chapters and then communicate a little bit. And it was in the middle of nowhere. It was not even big cities. It was near Xi'an, which is the western part of China. And back then, again, this is whatever, 30 years ago. And, no, it's more than 30 years ago, 40 years ago, close to 40 years ago. And there was very little infrastructure in terms of, hospital, medical facilities, things like that. I was, tourists from Japan, did not really understand what was going on. All I can say was I thought I was going to die because I had such a terrible stomachache, and I was aching everywhere in my body, and I had terrible fever. I didn't communicate. And I actually managed to write on a piece of paper something like terrible pain, terrible, wherever I was in pain, healthy, or something like that. And literally, like in the characters that I like here, stomach pain, fever, or something like that. And I guess the youth hostel that I was staying, people sort of read my my broken Chinese, and I get understood I wasn't paying. So they took me on the little it was actually a horse. They took me to this little countryside clinic, and I barely remember because I was having such a high fever. And they took me to this little clinic, and they gave me some shock, and they gave me some something that, again, I thought I was half purpose. And eventually I survived. So I was okay in the end, and I think I was in bed for a few days or something like that. Again, I probably had a very bad case of food poisoning or something. I don't even know to this day what happened. And quite frankly, these are type of things that you experience when you are traveling overseas, especially in developing countries, and quite frankly, it's part of experience. And I would say similar to my time in Cambodia, I survived the life without running water, running electricity type of situation in a country where the country was still coming out of a civil war. I mean, there was still fighting going on in the countryside when I live in Phnom Penh, so Phnom Penh was safer, but if you go to the countryside, there was still a lot of a lot of fighting, a lot of military fighting going on. The infrastructure was not great in terms of lifestyle. Of course, you get sick, you get food cleaning, where you get malaria, you get all kinds of things, and people. I did not get very sick, but my colleagues, my Asian colleagues, were really sick, and one of them had a really bad accident, helicopter, accident, and things like that was happening. Then you realize how lucky you are when you are safe and you're healthy. Again, these are the things that are just part of the risks you take when you travel or when you live in less developed countries. And I'm not saying that you should go try to experience horrible situations like that. But I'm just saying when you go to these places, it's just natural part of experience, and that's why it's that for young people who are healthy, this is maybe the only time they can take that kind of risk. I mean, if I had that situation now in China, whatever would go at my age, I could just really die, right? But I was 20 or something, so I survived. Yeah.
Awesome. When did you decide to leave Japan? Like, were there any decisive moments of after leave Japan?
I felt that I really needed to explore opportunities, or I just felt like my options are limited. In Japan, when I started to interview not interview, but I was starting to talk to people, to understand what my career options would be, right? So I was probably junior college, and how you visit, with friends who have been working for a couple of years, maybe from same universities. That's that's what you would do. If you're a student, junior, you have one more year before we finish college. So that's what I was doing. I was junior at college, and I was trying to really figure out, say what kind of jobs, available for me, what kind of jobs do I want to pursue. So I visited some people, my senpai, who joined large banks. And it was one of those visits I just realized that I did not want to pursue. I guess career opportunities in Japan. So just very visible. It was just very, in a way, kind of shocking experience that I had. One of those visits was that it was one of the largest, was one of the mega banks. So those banks, if you get jobs as fresh out of college, these jobs are considered to be the best, right? They stable, prestigious, well-known brand, and that's what you are expected to do if you have, if you graduate from university, you want to get jobs at those really well-known banks or trading firms. So one of those really one of the largest banks. So I go visit a few of my senpais, and one male senpai, he is very kind, and he spent time with me. And he told me about his job, and he was very positive about experience. And then another senpai who happens to be a woman, it's a woman senpai, maybe 3 years ahead of me, who also joined the same bank, and she also came in and talked to me about her job, which she just started it's interesting, very rewarding, interesting, blah blah blah. But what was shocking to me was she showed up in her uniform. He showed up in suit. And I'm thinking, why? I mean, they got the same job. I mean, they supposedly got the same job first because she was career sayo. She wasn't like assistant. She was the main banker job. She was doing supposedly the main banker job. But she was wearing ring fan,
Mm.
and he was not. And that was, to me, it was like, why? And then I realized back then, even though she was hired as, this for the same sort of type of job as her male counterparts, she was making tea for her colleague,
Mm.
and only woman. I'm like, why? And she said, well, silly days. I was like, oh,
That's good.
and back then, this was after the introduction of law. There was an introduction called, the law called, the Equal Employment Opportunity Law that was introduced in the 80s. So companies at that point, after the introduction of this bill, the companies in Japan who did not hire women for professional positions up until then, they all had to offer same professional positions to both male and female, applicants because of the law. So this was after that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, oh, great, now finally the Japanese government has introduced this law, and companies have to hire me, even I'm a woman, in the same, with the same conditions as male students. So I'm thinking this is great. And then I go to this largest bank in Japan who supposedly has changed their recruiting system so that women are also treated in the same way. I go visit them, and then I see woman, my female friend and my male friend, same college, join the band at the same time. My male friend wearing uniform, not uniform, suit, woman, friend wearing this uniform, and she is making tea for her male colleagues. I thought, maybe I should just leave Japan and see what else is available. So, I left Japan.
Yeah, yeah. And now that you left Japan and spent decades in the
I
US,
ended up staying, overseas.
overseas. And what are some aspects of Japan that you appreciate more now that you spend so much time outside of Japan?
Yeah, so I went to the US for graduate studies because instead I didn't even try to get a job after college. I said, better get I'm thinking I'm kind of proud of leave Japan, and I was very fortunate I was accepted to study in the US. So I did my master's degree at Stanford, and I ended up joining the United Nations. Though I did not go back to Japan after my master's degree. I did not go back to Japan. Instead I joined the United Nations. I stayed there for a couple of years, and I also went back to school now this time to get MBA. And I joined Goldman Sachs in New York, and I basically stayed outside Japan for almost at that point 20 years or so, until I came back to Japan about 15 years, 14, 15 years ago. Anyway, so I spent almost all my adult life outside Japan, mostly US, but a couple years in UK. Breaks like Cambodia or like in Barbados and like that, but just not in Japan. And I was able to really enjoy my job in different type of job, like nation banking. I was promoted to a senior position with Goldman Sachs. So I think that it was a good thing for me because like I said, if I had stayed in Japan, I would be wearing uniform, right, and making tea for my male colleagues. So I think it was a good decision on my behalf to stay outside Japan and pursue my career path. And so that was a good thing. But when I came back to Japan, what I thought, and again, the situation in terms of female identity education and in business, especially at the senior level, the leadership position, is still definitely behind, the other countries, especially like US or European countries. But it was definitely much better than, what I experienced, whatever, 20, 15 years, before. So that was still there in terms of how, how gender, equality was still a challenge in the Japanese society. But one thing that I really came to realize was, yes, of course, as a professional and, environment was much better in the US or in the European countries in terms of pursuing my career. But, as a society, there are definitely things that Japan has dealt with in a much more constructive way than, let's say, the US society that I sort of I'm in. And one of them is the fact that this division within the economy, division within society, um, again, I'm talking about the US, has really created a very different type of challenges. Again, when I talk about gender equality, Japan is definitely behind the US, right? But there are other aspects of society that you would look at, for example, opportunities for education. If you look at the U.S. education system, you kind of wonder, okay, what kind of people can afford, $100,000 tuition a year college, right? I mean, this is kind of crazy how expensive it is. And the access to education is a problem in the U.S. I mean, that's the college level that throughout a school system. So you see a huge sort of discrepancies in terms of access to education, access to healthcare. It's crazy how expensive it is to have insurance. I mean, it's just I go to U.S. and my daughter actually, she just had little folk issue. She was now at University of Merida, same like appendix, right? So she had to stay in a hospital and the appendix. She stayed in the hospital for 2 days or something in LA. And the bill I got was, I don't even want to think about it. It was crazy. I mean, lucky we had insurance, right? It's just absolutely just crazy how expensive. These are the basic social infrastructure, education, healthcare, and access to these basic social infrastructure is extremely divided in terms of who has access, who doesn't have access, and that just creates huge division, economic division, and I don't see that in Japan. There are different degrees of social challenges, but I don't see that level of discrimination that we see in the U.S. Which is causing a lot of different problems. So when I came back to Japan, it's a very homogeneous society. And for it could be very stuffy and, the different, just, as I said earlier, my mother was very different. That just really worked for her in terms of, with her branch. But in Japan, in general, being different from others is not considered a very good thing, right? You're like, the black sheep and you don't fit in. And, that's the sort of cultural sort of, tendency. Again, it doesn't present a very good aspect of this innovative environment. However, if you look at the social, sort of social environment that we are in, that homogeneous element culture can sometimes help to prevent society from having such divisive situation in terms of who have access to healthcare, who have access to education. So I think that's a great thing that Japan has been able to maintain. So I think the U.S. has to look at Japan and get, how is Japan handling this, right?
That's very interesting and kind of related to this book that you wrote about 9 years ago, Population Decline as a Weapon. And if you haven't read it, I recommend everyone to read this. But so you share some interesting statistics in this book about how the Japanese workforce or population is the most educated in the world in terms of reading comprehension and mathematical analysis skills. And I think it's true. And on average, I think Japanese people are very highly educated because the bottom is very high, but also the ceiling is very low as well. on the other hand, as you mentioned, America, the US has a different educational philosophy that it's polarized, it's divided. The most educated are highly exceptionally educated, but also the poorest don't have access to education. And but at the same time, America is very innovative. So all the innovative companies are coming from the US, whereas Japan is considered economically stagnant. But there are always pros and cons. As you mentioned, it's safe and it's stable, whereas US is polarized, it's dangerous, but also you can foster some innovative spirit. Is there? I feel like this is like a trade-off that all countries need to make, but it, I guess you are already advising government, or in terms of economic policy or educational policy. Like, well, what would you advise governments to focus on, like more high average, or on trying to foster more outlier, exceptional talent? And is it really that zero sum game, or can we have safe and prosperous but also innovative society?
I think that this is, a very experimental situation, because I don't think we have any other cases in other countries who have been able to succeed to come up with this model, which, can basically satisfy both, right? But if any one country, anyone is going to be successful, in Japan can be the only, I don't want to say the only thing, maybe there are other countries can do this too. But Japan can be definitely one of the very few countries who have all the conditions that are required, that are necessary to make it happen. There is a very strong social infrastructure, first of all. So let's paint the picture. We encourage entrepreneurship, and we encourage sort of, again, being different is not a bad thing. You can be very different. You can be, for a black sheep, and still, you can take risks, and you can start your own business, and, you're not working for a large company. You could fail, but, give it a try. So you encourage that kind of, entrepreneurship and taking risks. And at the same time, Japan has a very strong social, safety net, right? So there is this social infrastructure that can back you up in case things don't work out. So let's say if your company goes bust, and you have financial at least there is this great medical healthcare system, right? So you don't, in the US, that's a problem. If you don't have the financial means, you may not have access to healthcare. And so Japan actually has that infrastructure to support people who may take risks, may not necessarily succeed. And so that's number one. Education is again, healthcare and education, these are two really big components of this social infrastructure that we need to have in order for us to encourage people to take it. So education in the US, like I said, of course, there's a public schooling system. But in terms of the quality of education, the discrepancies is just crazy. And as a result, as you said earlier, Japanese population, if you take the average, it's really high in terms of literacy, writing and reading, and numeric skills. It's literally the highest in the world. Because the education, the core of education is very standard. It's very high. The standard is very high. Whereas in the U.S., quality education is really good at one, side of equation. Even if you look at the top universities and top institutions, they're literally world class, right? But then if you look at the other, whatever percentage of the school, they may not provide great quality education, and therefore the discrepancies are huge. So if you are lucky enough to be in that 1%, the top 1%, top 5%, they receive the $100,000 a year education at top university. You're great, but if you're not, then what do you do, right? And so that's the problem. For Japan, in the both component in terms of education and healthcare, the Japanese society can provide a very solid social safety net. for people to be able to take risks. And, hopefully people do not take, uncontained risks. Hopefully people assess risks and take risks accordingly. But risks are risks. There are always, people who do not succeed. And hopefully if that happens, when that happens, there is a social infrastructure support there. But not only that, the other component that's extremely important is for a labor market to be rooted in flexible enough for those people who want to give second time, who might have failed for the first trial, but they should be given second chance. They should be given a third chance. If the labor market is so rigid that does not give people opportunities to get second and third and fourth round, then Japan doesn't have a lot of future. Because at the end of the day, entrepreneurship and innovation is fading and learning lessons from failures, right? So if the infrastructure to support people in terms of healthcare and education, that's great. But if those people are not given second chance, the third chance to try again, it doesn't give a lot of new innovative ideas to the society. And therefore, I think a lot of the things would have to come in hand. We already have very good infrastructure in terms of healthcare, in terms of education. What we don't have yet is the labor market, the job market that's dynamic, that's fluid, and I think that's something that government really has to work on. Not only the government, but also private sector companies who actually can play a very important role in promoting entrepreneurship and more dynamic job market. So I think a combination of these things can be extremely powerful. Japan can be, like I said, there aren't that many countries who have all these elements. Japan is one of the very few countries in the world who have, in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, and quite frankly, there is a lot of money in Japan. So the capital that Japan as a country had, it's incredible. There is money. Whether that money is risk money or not, that's a separate question. That capital base is extremely rich and humongous. Of that, what percentage of that capital can be channeled to the startup ecosystem in the form of this capital. And that also has to happen in the labor market. I said if the labor market can become a lot more dynamic, we have all these great things. I think Japan can be in a really good spot.
Amazing. Speaking of education, what is your educational philosophy for your own? I think you have 3 kids.
Yeah, I decided that I'm not the best person to give. I don't instruct them. So, the guidance I can give them is just listen to yourself, and like my parents did to me. And then the reason why I say this is things have changed so much, right? So, I just wrote this article that I just published. I haven't had a chance to look at it. I write articles for newspapers and I just pick a different topic and I write about, what I think is happening. So the latest one that I just wrote, is based on what my son is doing. So I have 3 kids and the older one is senior and the middle one is, she's a sophomore this year and then the younger one is in high school. But anyway, my son who is junior, he is software he's a software engineering major. And when he was in high school, trying to really decide what to study, so computer science. Computer science seemed like a really good place to be, right? If you're computer science, major, then, opportunities are, complex. And he was also in a cons background, so that's what he did. He decided to study computer science. And quite frankly, I think he'd been very happy with what he'd been studying. But, look at the job market today. Like, computer science major, you have no job. I mean, you're getting, if you're in the computer science field, jobs are just getting slashed every day. I mean, it's crazy. All these announcements that are coming out of, you know, of very large companies, startups. Computer science jobs are just disappearing by thousands. And so, as a mother, what do I tell my son? Oh yeah, computer science sounds like a great field to study. And that's what I said 3 years ago. And he's now junior. I'm like, Mom, there are no jobs, right? So in terms of what I say to my kid is, I can give guidance, but I know things are changing. I know, based on what I have experienced, I don't think I'm a good person to say, this is the field that, that we should be looking into or anything like that. All I can say is, listen to your heart and what do you really want to do? Who do you think you are? Who do you want to become? And just follow your heart, right? That's the best I can do. Um, and, I'm glad my parents did for me because I just did kind of crazy stuff back then. And thank goodness I, wasn't really constrained by my parents. And I'm hoping I'm doing the same for my kids. And my the three kids are very different and they are choosing different sort of path, which is fine. Yeah.
Did you and your partner discuss a lot to whether to send them to local Japanese school or international school or private school?
So my husband and I were in New York before we moved back to Japan, and he's American, so my husband's American, and in Quebec we always thought that so my kids are born in New York. They came back here, but they were still little. We thought that they would end up in the U.S., at least for college. We actually did not think he would stay in Japan this long, to be honest with you. So that's another reason why we thought, okay, well, our kids will eventually go back to the U.S. and we go back to the U.S. at some point. And therefore, we did not think seriously about the option of sending our kids to Japanese school, thinking that they will eventually go back to the U.S. They will go back to the U.S. education system. And therefore, we actually enrolled in an American school in Japan, so they're open in SIJ. But I did enroll in Kumon. They hated it, but they actually now they thank me because it kind of I think helped them to sort of solidify their mathematical sort of skills. Yeah. So and they are now college in the US.
And I read somewhere that you give your children stocks for their birthdays.
Yeah, so I said this is much later in high school, and again, at 41, and my son was really starting to pay attention to the whole financial industry and the stock market. And I said, okay, the best way to learn about the stock market is to invest. I said, well, just choose a company that you want to invest. And of course, she was too young to invest at home, so well, that needs to buy account. But that's what I did. And, she's got to pay attention, right? The stock market, that was his money, right? And the stock goes up to this, and, I made this much, and can I buy, new pair of sneakers? And, so it was a very simple sort of, way for them to really to be exposed to the stock market. So I think it was a good way for them to be interested in.
Did they say that they learned something from it? Or?
Yeah, so eventually, like my son is very interested in, the financial market and he's in his junior, he's still in college, but people who know that I think he might actually go into that direction. So he's still, now he's investing on his own.
Oh,
yeah. So I think it just, give him a little bit of a initial push. I think it was a good thing. Yeah.
Let's go back to your career. So your first career was the UN, and then it's like non-profit social return sector, and then you went to the finance sector, Goldman Sachs. Were there any culture shock or internal conflict that you had to overcome?
So a lot of people that are your soul in your soul. Goldman Sachs. Half joking age. No, I really didn't. So what happened was, like I said, I was a graduate student at Stanford and did my master's degree there. And, when I was backpacking and, going visiting different countries, I saw a lot of mostly developing countries. I felt as if there was definitely need for the global society to work with uh, less developed economies or less developed countries to bring their you know living standard up to the level that I are um, used to. So I had a very naive, this very green idea that I want to be part of that movement to help these economies, these developing economies. Um, and so when I was finishing up my master's degree, trying to think about what I wanted to do, I wanted to actually do that. And the animation was very sort of straightforward. It's just exactly like what they do, right? So I applied and I was able to get a job, and that's how I ended up with nations. And my first job within that, it wasn't like I had sorting of that. It's just that be for assignment. This is this. I was sent to Caribbean. I was based in Barbados, but I was covering the entire Caribbean, Eastern Caribbean region. And as first year out of school, first job, um, I was working on a number of different projects in the region. One of two of them had to do with credit unions. So basically, we're working with small, local businesses and trying to create a vehicle to provide small loans. Now we call it microfinance, but back then there was no name like that. The small loans are made available to local small business owners, and so the credit union and the United Nations did work with local banks to create that kind of a vehicle, and that was one of my projects. So through these types of projects and programs, I realized that yes, it's great if you work with those countries and try to help those countries to become more developed economies. At the end of the day, what they really need is really not the money from United Nations or money from the governments. It's the money from the private sector. Without capital from the private sector, these economies are not going to be able to stand on their own feet. So as I was working to create these credit unions, the vehicles, I realized that yes, we can be as United Nations, we can be hopeful to get them going. We can help them to construct these vehicles or in infrastructure. But at the end of the day, it's the private sector money that has to go into those economies doing these vehicles. And without that, these economies are never going to be able to support themselves. We, as a public sector entity, we can help them at the initial stage, but it's only the initial stage. They have to be able to grow up economies. Those countries would have people to grow up, find ways to support themselves without company support. So I wanted to understand how that can happen. I wanted to understand how the private sector money can flow into these economies. And as a first year or second year, program officer within the United Nations, I try to understand that. And I really did not understand. I did not, in theory, I understood. I studied get my studies, uh, you know, if I groups and just understand the logics there. But it was not enough for me to understand exactly how the capital market would work and how the capital from the private sector would flow into these economies. So that's when I realized, okay, I try to help these economies and then being very naive and green, I want to do the right thing. But then I felt my limitations. I can do this for now, but are they going to be able to survive? I mean, when we pull out, when we are done with the project, are they going to be able to support themselves? No, because there's no private sector money, right? So we go into these economies and we go into these countries and set up these credit unions. 5 years later, United Nations the project's over. We leave. What's going to happen to those economies? Nothing. There's no private sector money. So I wanted to really understand that, and that's what I wanted to do. And I actually realized that at that point, I wanted to get exposure to more private sector financial industry. And I started to write letters. I was started to send my resumes to Goldman Sachs of the world and other banks and, even from companies saying, hey, I've been doing this with the United Nations for the last 2 years, and I now really want to experience, I want to learn the private sector capital market. And they all said, thank you for applying. Your background is interesting, but we're not giving you job offers because you really have nothing to offer. I'm like, oh, great. So I got ding, 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 ding. And that's why my friend said, you should apply to business school. Business school can give you the fundamental sort of basic education to go into private sector market. So I did that. I went to business school, and after 3 years of business school, my friend was right. I was able to get job offers from the companies who said no to many years. So, and I joined Goldman Sachs, and I did a private sector. No, it's a very big company to learn about how the capital market will work, and it was great for me to be able to experience it. Now I understand or understood how the capital would flow into certain companies, certain sectors, certain countries. And it was a great experience for me to be able to see both the public sector and the private sector. And as I was with the United Nations, I was there for a long time, with Goldman Sachs in New York, I saw a lot of really interesting, so many of my bosses, very senior people who were at Goldman Sachs, funders or something, a very high level, they actually, after their career at Goldman Sachs, they started to move down to Washington, D.C. They would take up public sector jobs, whether they're the head of the global, the World Bank or, the government's, the senior positions. And I realized, oh, this is a really good way to sort of apply what you have learned in the private sector in the public sector. So I started to think, oh, maybe that's what I should do. So I did the first job navigation, and I did the private sector job for a long time with Goldman Sachs. What do I want to do next? I thought about going back to public sector. That's when I started to think about options in the public sector, where I could leverage my experience as a London sector banker. Then I got a job with the AC. So that's sort of a big circle.
Cool circle. Yeah. And then in 2021, you co-founded Empower Partners.
Yeah, so Kathy Murphy was my colleague at Goldman Sachs. Daniel was my 1 year senpai at business school for a long time. And we of us same age and same work 8 months. And we know each other for about 40 some years. And we then we'll get together once in a while and sort of compare notes and sort of what they're doing in our lives. And for the end, so that, at least 20, give up in 20, and King were just, just we're having a casual conversation, and we were trying to figure out, what we wanted to do next. And this was the idea that we all felt very passionate about in terms of starting a venture capital fund in Japan. So it's 2021, yeah.
You mentioned that when your mother started her business, you were scared. But when you started your own fund,
Yeah.
what were you feeling?
I was excited. I mean, I was very scared. And I don't think it's scared is the right. We didn't know what to expect, but we also knew that we wanted to do something that would just make a difference. And we also knew that we were able to leverage what we had done in our lives up until the point. So we were very excited. Yeah.
So one last question. If you could give one piece of advice for a large group of young people, what would that be?
There's a saying in Japan, you do this, you test the stone before you cross the bridge, right? In Japan, I would say the opposite. So I would just say go for it. I think when I think about what I did, it's kind of crazy. But I do think that, especially young people, many college kids, this is probably the only time you can take really huge risks. So, I couldn't do now what I did, when I was younger. So I would say, don't worry about consequences. Just go for crazy stuff.
Let's go for it. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so
It's
much
an
for
honor
having
to
me.
have you,
Thank you so
Michelle.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.